Good evening, everyone. Welcome back from dinner. If everyone could take their seats, please, we can bring the beers closer to our mouths somehow. So this is the second session on mega events. Mega events 2, can Agenda 2020 inspire sustainability in sport? And as we saw in the last session, we have a lot of differing opinions, a lot of different perspectives, and we hope to continue this very vibrant debate here relative explicitly to Agenda 2020. And we have 4 speakers and 5 panelists, as Sarah Lewis will join us on the panel at the end. I would ask that the presenters keep to the normal time limit of 12 to 15 minutes, and we'll cycle through them and save questions for the end, I believe. So please hold your questions to the end. We'll do what we've been doing all week, and we'll continue tomorrow. So first, I'd like to welcome Chadia Afkir from UNODC, who will talk about the UNODC strategy for safeguarding against corruption in major public events. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone had a nice dinner, and not too tired because it's the end of the evening. So I'm very happy to be among you tonight. So tonight I'm gonna discuss or address the strategy that we have within UNODC, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes against corruption in major public events. Yeah, so as you all know, and I've been listening to our presentation earlier today, there is a high risk of corruption in the organization, normally on a major public event, and for that matter, more on major sport events. Why? Is because significant resources are usually involved. There's also involvement of complex logistical arrangement and also insufficient anti-corruption policies that are in place. So this is why at our level within the UNODC, and especially in the section where I'm working, like addressing the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, but also on the handbook that we developed, which is Untitled Strategy for Safeguarding Against Corruption in Major Public Events, we felt that it was important to share with you our views on that. So in this handbook, basically, you would find the relevant provision on the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and also some effective corruption prevention measures. There's also some example of there's also some practical examples and best practices. So we do have some specific challenges, as you know, that are associated with the organization of major events. This is linked to the exceptional nature of the event, and there's a likelihood in this case that the regulation and standards are a little bit set aside or like softened. There's also lack of monitoring, usually auditing and accountability. This is something that we noticed, and this is something also that is addressed in the provision of a Convention Against Corruption, and also lack of independent oversights of activities. There's also lack of transparency on public funds, how they are like managed, usually when organizing such events. And there's also the issue linked to that's quite important to our mind, linked to the recruitment, training, and supervision of a staff that are to work for this, while organizing this major event. So I'm just trying to, nope, it's not there. Sorry about that, I just think I have a... No. Oh, this one. Apologies, I just have a problem with my presentation, because this is not the proper slide. All right, sorry about that. So basically, on the next slide, I wanted to discuss the recruitment, selection, and training of personnel. So apologies for that. So it is quite important, and this is what the handbook addresses, but it's also what the provision of a convention addresses. It's very important when it comes to the recruitment, hiring, and management of staff that are involved in the organization of a major public event, such as a sport event. For example, we would advise to have during interviews for key staff, or like for potential staff that are potentially could be good candidates for key position, to have questions on good governance, for example, and also to make sure that these people have clean records. There's also important to address like a question, for example, linked to legislation, for example, just to make sure that potential candidates are actually aware of key legislation and anti-corruption. That's something that could be relevant. When talking about the selection of staff, it's also important, in order to avoid conflict of interest, to have a disclosure system, very important, especially to all managers and employers. And this is actually one of the articles in our convention, in Article 8, that are actually encouraging also public officials to report any act of corruption, or to make their supervisor aware when there's a conflict of interest. So there's also so now my slide is here. This is also very important while organizing a major sport event, major public event, to have a close look at the financial management. Very important for us on our side, from UNODC side, to promote transparency and accountability in management of funds. For example, having a legal entity which could be responsible for the management of capital budget, that's something that could be relevant. There was, for example, for the 2008 Beijing Olympics, they had what we call the Bangkok Finance Department, who was actually responsible for managing the funds. So it's something it's an example that could be followed for example. As far as financial control, as I was saying, very important to have an independent oversight mechanisms that could have a look at the accounting books, records, financial statement. It's something that we encourage in the provision of our Convention Against Corruption. Internal and external audits, very important, that has to be conducted very regularly. When it comes to external audits, maybe make sure that it's not conducted after the event has taken place, but also during the holding of the event. The transparency as well and the public reporting of the finance is very important, that the authority that is in charge of organizing the major event actually reports to the authorities on a regular basis. And there's also I think this is transparency and public, and maybe I can go to the other slide. This is the slide I was talking about. Sorry, I think there was a mix. Okay. It's also very important to identify vulnerable position within the organization. As I was saying earlier, for key position, for example, important to have a pre-appointment screening. And also we should have specific terms and conditions when hiring someone, and very important to have a rotation of staff, not to have the same staff remaining too long at the same position. Code of conduct and disciplinary measures, I think some other colleagues have addressed these questions earlier, quite important as well. I think the authority, we believe at UNODC that the authority who is in charge of organizing the major event should adopt its own code of conduct and and that it could maybe follow the examples of what public servants are having. For example, need for disciplinary measures, very important, and that has to be enforced in case the staff is not following the code of conduct. So it's also important when we are organizing a major event, when we talk about public procurement, to have like some criteria that needs to be firm, objective, transparent, and publicly available. This is also something that our convention is actually promoting. We need a fair system to exclude some suppliers who would have been involved, for example, in briberies, and of course, shouldn't be any conflict of interest. The evaluation of potential suppliers or contractors should be made public, should be transparent, and the individual, of course, that are involved in the recruitment of contractors or suppliers should be, of course, act fairly, impartially, and there shouldn't be any conflict of interest. The same for the contracting. Once we sign up the contract, very important to have afterwards to to have information about the identity of the suppliers, the price of a contract. This information should be made available to the public. And this information you can find in the handbook and also encourage in our convention. And whenever we review legislation of states, we do encourage states to adopt all these measures to be more in compliance. Important to have the same encouragement of documentary records. Important that the authority who is organizing this major sport event have a record of information on procurement proceedings even long after the public event has taken place. This document should be accessible. And on the supervision of procurement activities, as I was saying, audits are also necessary. Another actor that is very important when discussing the organization of major event is the private sector. So the same here. We do have some provision in our constitution, in our conventions around corruption, which is really encouraging states to have relevant legislation in order to punish the private sector would be involved in bribery offense, and match fixing could be one of them. So we encourage corruption of a free culture of corruption. For example, in the private sector, what we want to encourage is to have maybe integrity pact between the private sector and the authority who is in charge of the organization of the major public event. I think I'll be just quickly here because I just have a few minutes. It's the same here about conflict of interest. We also have strong provision in our convention with actually encouraging the private sector to manage the conflict of interest, and also integrity provision with private sector organization. Same when an authority, for example, is handling managing a major event with professional association, would be important for this authority to make sure that this professional association, like with medical doctors or lawyers or engineers or architects, have a code of conduct, and that they have disciplinary measures shouldn't they follow this. Important, I think, the last would be sponsorship. Very important, because it's usually the value of sponsorship is not something that we could measure. So it's important to address the risk with each potential sponsorship arrangement. I think what would be important is to really publicize the criteria for acceptable sponsorship. It's quite important. And this would avoid some trouble, and it's also again something that we address in the articles of our convention. So I don't know. I think we've been discussing this. I mean, some of the colleagues today have been discussing this about the whistleblower protection. I think the authority who is in charge of organizing a major event should have some hotline in place for people to be able to report. But when it comes to whistleblower protection, very important to maintain confidentiality. And here, once again, in our convention against corruption, we do have articles who encourage states to have a strong legislation and to have legislation to encourage whistleblowing, but also to protect whistleblowers. So I think this is quite important to know. And then this one I can skip because I think I just have, and I will finish with this one because I think I just have 2 minutes left. Very important as well, I think each country has what we call anti-corruption body or several anti-corruption bodies. So I think whenever this anti-corruption body is in place, important maybe for the authority who is organizing this major event to maybe liaise with this anti-corruption body, because this anti-corruption body, for example, could receive complaints and on, like bribery or corruption that could be going on in a major event on sport, for example. So I think this, working together, there's something that could help tackle any bribery or corruption offense. So, and this anti-corruption agency could help develop a preventive strategy for this, for the organization of major public events. So I thank you very much. I tried to be quick. So thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's always interesting to see the projects that are developed and documented and pushed forward as suggestions, and we'll get to see how these have potential implementation for real policy in the debate. I realized I neglected to introduce myself at the beginning. I was so eager to get going. I'm Christopher Gaffney. I'm a geographer based at the University of Zurich, and I have been researching the impacts of major sporting events on urban areas, particularly in Brazil, for the last 10 years or so. So that's my specialization, so you know where the position I'm coming from. The next speaker is Naomi Westland, who is the media manager for sport and human rights associated with Amnesty International and the Sport and Rights Alliance. And she is asking the very provocative question, beyond the PR fluff, will mega sport events ever be a force for good? So Naomi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
There's a great home crowd here today, and you can see why.
Yes, Jeff, this lot are a real force to be reckoned with. They've got a tight defensive unit and plenty in attack as well.
You can see that they're proud to wear the shirt. Great pace, great movement, real desire. There's the gaffer looking on.
All you need to do is look at his CV. It's an impressive regime. At the end of the day, these guys really make it hard for someone to come here and have a go.
Real end-to-end stuff here today, with both sides setting out their stall. Of course, the question on the crowd's mind is who'll be the first to make an attacking move. And there it is. What a strike.
Not only that, Jeff, he's got some quality attacking support alongside him. Let's take a look at that again.
You certainly can't question his talent as a striker. What a blow to the opposition. So far, it's been pretty even between the two sides. A real grudge match.
You're not wrong, Jeff. We'll need to see some bold play to break this deadlock.
Absolutely. In it comes, swooping down, driving into the heart of the defence. Devastating stuff.
It's a tactic that can be applied again and again. The opposition just don't stand a chance.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here and not in the bar. That video we made to promote a film festival, a football film festival we held in London last year just ahead of the World Cup. And we used it to introduce the idea of sport and human rights to our supporters, because people don't always make the connection between sport and human rights, but really you only need to look at some recent sports events, big international sports events, and others coming up, and the link is clear to see. There's no shortage of governments looking to launder their country's image internationally, consolidate power at home, or export soft power abroad, and major sports bodies seem more than willing to comply, yet sports events can and do lead to serious human rights abuses. I'll just give you some examples which you will all already know, but I think they need to be repeated because the picture that we're seeing is pretty bad. So ahead of the European Games in Baku in June, the government of Azerbaijan embarked on a particularly harsh crackdown on government critics. So that meant that journalists, human rights lawyers, opposition politicians were targeted and arrested and jailed on trumped-up charges. There are now at least 20 prisoners of conscience in Azerbaijan. That's an amnesty term, and what it means is that they're people who are in prison simply for peacefully exercising their right to freedom of expression. And this happened in the run-up to the European Games in what was already one of the most repressive regimes in Europe. Silencing its critics, the Azerbaijani government must have reasoned, would help it to use international media interest in the event to sell an image of itself as a modern, dynamic, progressive country, when in terms of human rights, it's anything but that. I, along with 2 colleagues from Amnesty, was blocked from entering the country 2 days before the Games. The Guardian newspaper was barred the following day. So what we saw, well, actually Amnesty was, 2 of my colleagues were deported again last month. So what started off as a crackdown on human rights at home became a shutting up shop to international scrutiny. And this is particularly worrying because the European Games were just the start of the Aliyev regime's sporting ambitions. As you all know now, Formula One's going to the country next year, and Baku will host 4 games in the European Football Championships in 2020. So holding the authorities there to account over their human rights record as they try to launder their image and sell a squeaky clean image of themselves through these events and through the media is going to become much more difficult, but we will keep doing it. Crossing continents for a moment, in the run-up to the Football World Cup in Brazil last year, thousands took to the streets to protest against the government's spending on the event while schools and hospitals were so underfunded, and also about corruption linked to the event. The police responded with violence. They fired tear gas and rubber bullets, and they used handheld batons to beat protesters. And looking ahead to the Olympics in Rio next year, thousands have been forcibly evicted from their homes to make way for infrastructure for the event, and it's an event that's going to be policed by a force that is responsible for the killing of 1,500 civilians, most of them, that's in the last 5 years, most of them are young black men. Before that, a clampdown on gay rights and free speech overshadowed the Winter Olympics in Sochi in Russia last year, and those issues will no doubt come to the fore again in 2018 as Russia hosts the World Cup. Russia has also passed a law banning undesirable foreign organisations, so you can guess who might be on that list. The World Cup after that, after 2018, of course, goes to Qatar. You'll all know about the serious abuses there of migrant workers who are forced to live in squalid conditions, work in dangerous conditions, and often have their wages withheld and their passports taken away. And just in one last example for now, going back to 2008, the Beijing Olympics were accompanied by a crackdown on free press and on peaceful protests. China's human rights record has actually got worse since then, and we've seen the government ratcheting up censorship, increasingly controlling the media and jailing its critics. So as China seeks to use international media attention around the Winter Olympics in 2022, evidence sadly shows that things are unlikely to get better as they approach. So there's little doubt, really, that a country's human rights problems are exacerbated when a big sports event comes to town. And unless major sports bodies act to turn this around, they're really running the risk of their events becoming associated as much with human rights abuses as they are with sport. It was an awareness of precisely this that prompted football fans to get in touch with Football Supporters Europe, which is the umbrella body for football supporters federations across Europe, to express their anger and disgust at the next editions of the World Cup being hosted by Russia and Qatar, respectively. This is a global celebration of the sport they love. And they wanted to know what they could do about it. So Football Supporters Europe got in touch with Transparency International Germany, and together they contacted organisations that they'd seen were working on sport and human rights. That included Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, the International Trade Union Confederation, Terre des Hommes, as well as other sports organisations like FIFPro and Uniathletes, to learn more and to see if there was something that maybe we could all do together to address this sorry state of affairs. So what began as an initial meeting in Berlin last autumn, just to chat things through, quickly became an alliance of some of the biggest human rights and anti-corruption NGOs, trade unions and sports organisations, agreeing to pool their knowledge and experience, expertise and access to campaign for a more ethical approach from major sports bodies to big sports events. This became the Sport and Rights Alliance. So we're a loose coalition, joining forces when we think we can be stronger together while continuing to do our individual work on the issues specific to our organisations. Our focus is on urging major sports bodies to ensure that human rights and transparency measures are at the heart of all stages of hosting an event. So that's from initial bids to developing and staging the event through to final reporting. One of the things that we have done is write to the heads of major sports organisations with our recommendations on how this can be achieved. In February, we sent a letter to Thomas Bach, President of the International Olympic Committee, ahead of an IOC meeting on the implementation of Agenda 2020. And just as a reminder what that is, it is the IOC's plan for the future of the Olympic movement, and it claimed it would promote Olympic values of non-discrimination, friendship, solidarity and fair play. This had been passed unanimously in December last year, and this letter that we sent also came ahead of the closing of registration to bid for the 2024 Olympics. That was last month. So we outlined two critical steps that the IOC needed to ensure that those Games, 2024, and all Olympic events that follow can be celebrated not just for their sporting glory, but for upholding Olympic principles too. We said that the bidding criteria and the host city contract for 2024 and beyond needed to include protection of, for example, the right to protest, to freedom of expression, to join a trade union, to collective bargaining, to not be forcibly evicted, and to be protected from discrimination at work. In addition to that, a robust and effective monitoring mechanism needs to be put in place to ensure that any human rights promises that are made are kept. And to ensure that at every stage of an event there aren't any human rights abuses. And all of these standards must be non-negotiable and absolutely binding for everybody involved. The IOC have said they're keen to work with us and hear our advice. So far, so good. And it looked like they might be starting to properly get to grips with the issues. But, as ever, actions speak louder than words. The first hint that we had that Agenda 2020 might not be quite what it was cracked up to be came with the European Games. As Lady Gaga belted out John Lennon's iconic protest song Imagine at the opening ceremony, Mr. Bach stood literally shoulder to shoulder with Presidents Aliyev and Putin. Not really the best image to show the world if you want to prove that your word is your honour. In fact, he breathed not a word of condemnation of Azerbaijan's human rights record and their crackdown on human rights ahead of the Games, despite widespread media coverage making it impossible to deny knowledge of what was going on. The European Olympic Committees, for their part, maintained that the human rights crackdown around their event had nothing to do with them. The second test of Agenda 2020 was, of course, the publication of the host city contracts last month for 2024. And this is the first host city contract to be launched since Agenda 2020 was adopted. But despite all the promises, the IOC failed to include in the contract an explicit commitment to respect and protect human rights. We described that at the time as an astonishing omission. The new contract does prohibit discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation. This was a clause introduced into the Olympic Charter after Sochi 2014. And it includes requirements to allow the media to report freely for the duration of the Games. and for the building of infrastructure for the event to comply with international labour standards. But none of these changes go far or deep enough. What good is it, for example, to allow free reporting on the Games in a country that doesn't permit a free press and whose authorities routinely jail journalists that it doesn't like? Requirements on labour and anti-corruption standards are also severely lacking in detail in the contract. While host cities are required to comply with labour and anti-corruption laws in, I quote, all venue construction and infrastructure development projects, no guarantees are required on merchandising or the supply chain. Good governance as an overall concept is also missing. And while anti-doping measures are prominently mentioned in the preamble to the contract, there's no reference to anti-match fixing, which leaves the impression that the IOC thinks doping is more damaging to competition than corruption. So you could conclude that the IOC was looking for a neat PR win with Agenda 2020, making it appear that they were doing the right thing while only paying lip service. With FIFA in such a mess, it could show itself as the good guy of global sport. Or you could conclude that they simply didn't understand what it is they need to do. Real change needs real commitment, and that's what's lacking here. Unless and until robust measures are introduced to protect and monitor human rights, major sports events are not going to be the force for good they so often claim to be. Bringing these changes in now, with some of the countries running for 2024 possibly more likely to support a commitment to human rights and labour standards, will make it much easier for the IOC to set this as a benchmark for future host city contracts and future bidding processes, where the list of interested countries may be more cause for concern. And it's interesting to note that for all FIFA's current woes, World Football's governing body has adopted UN guidance on conducting business in a human rights friendly way, and on protecting against corruption. It's introduced these in its new bidding regulations. This means that all future bids to host the World Cup, in theory, have to meet tighter human rights and transparency criteria. However, with the possibility of Salman al-Khalifa, a Bahraini sheikh accused of involvement in the arrest and torture of a number of athletes who joined democracy protests in 2011, possibly becoming the next FIFA president, it's not quite clear how this will pan out. You could take a guess, though. He denies the allegations, but either way, that's another story.
Thank you, Naomi. One wonders if Los Angeles were to get the Games, how the United States human rights record might play into public consciousness with the largest incarcerated population in the world and ongoing drone strikes and presidential kill lists. This would be an interesting discussion for later as well. Now we turn to Jürgen Griesbeck, who will talk to us about his work as the CEO and founder of Street World Football, with a talk entitled Time to Unleash the Potential of Football. Thank you, Jürgen. Change your name for you.
This happens all the time. Sometimes it's Street Football World, sometimes it's Street World Football or Street Football something. So it's Street Football World, and we're talking about, I apologize for my voice. It's a bit croaky, it's just a cold I'm not getting rid of. I want to pick up on two things Naomi just mentioned. One was the importance of working together, and the other one was having a shared vision, so you know why you're working together. And I think both I would go a step further and not just stay with the mega events in sports, but actually apply it to sports as a whole. I think sports, and especially football, lack a vision, and therefore we don't understand actually what we're talking about oftentimes, and we don't know what are the aims we are pursuing. So I will take these 10 minutes to give you an idea of what we do. We actually focus on football, but that's not just because that's what we do, but it's what we believe, and again, Naomi mentioned it, football and FIFA could now actually be the game changer if the situation was taken as an opportunity. And we believe very much in this, and as in football as the sports phenomenon with the biggest reach, with, let's say, the most widely shared, let's say, language, and obviously with the most people participating in it. My personal reason to be in that is that at the World Cup in 1994, a friend of ours was participating. He made a mistake. He scored an own goal. And when he came back at that time to Colombia, he was killed. So that's when I started to think about violence or social challenges and the opportunity we do have with football to tackle it. So this works like this. So that's the three topics I would like to share with you today. Quickly give you an introduction in Football for Good. I didn't think about that initially, but when I had conversations over coffee or over a beer, I became aware that it's not commonly shared what that is about. So I will have 2 or 3 minutes on that. Then the second point I want to look at is how do we close the loop, which means not only looking at how can we, let's say, integrate a giving back mentality into sports, but how can it be part of the DNA to actually contribute to society in a consistent way. And the third one is, I mean, we have heard a lot of accusations towards what we call over the week the system, and I would just like all of us to look also at ourselves and see how much of the system is in ourselves and what could we in our daily lives change and collectively then achieve the system change we all want to see. So Football for Good, beyond charity. Street Football World is a network of over 100 organizations. These are all social organizations working on a community level. They have a social issue they want to tackle, and all of them, independently from each other, identify football as a tool to increase their impact. What does football do in the work of these organizations? It just is the tool to attract the young people they want to work with, normally marginalized youth. Male and female, and it keeps these young people long enough in a process in order to work on behavior change. So the social issue can be any. It can be HIV and AIDS awareness, it can be no access to the health system, it can be social inclusion, migration. It depends on the community these organizations are working in, but football always works in the same way. As an average, it increases the impact by around about 20%. So an example, an organization in France working on the topic of migration, and the focus is employability, so work placement or education towards entrepreneurship of young people who normally wouldn't have access to it. And they have a rate of 80% of placement or founding youth. So this is far beyond and above normal, let's say, state-driven methodologies. That's just one of the examples. So what the reach of these hundreds of these 110 organizations, I have to say, is 1.5 million youth currently, and it's not just that these young people have an opportunity by participating in this and actually go back and believe in having an opportunity in life. It's also, I mean, just the physical education part of it or the physical activity part of it affects our national economies, but it's also the savings in the crime system or in the health system or in the education system. You don't invest in programs that are directed to people who are not part of it, but you can actually save and invest in people who are contributing as taxpayers to the societies. So, but football does not leverage this this potential. It's just understood as a charity. So there might be a football club having a foundation, or there might be a football player having a foundation, and they all start and reinvent the wheels. They have different motivations to do so. They do communication, they do marketing, they want to increase their social profile, or different motivations. And there is not really a consistent approach to leveraging this potential of the sport. At the same time, it's currently just a one-way street. So you have the consumer, in a normal business you would call the fan a consumer, who actually invests in everything. The consumer buys the TV rights, the consumer buys the tickets to the stadium, the consumer buys the merchandise. And this is the value why then a broadcasting company or a private company invests a lot of money into the sport, because they expect higher sales. But as I said, in the case of football, this is just a flow then into, let's say, a World Cup, and from a World Cup to the Confederation, from a Confederation to the Federation, or if it's a Champions League, it's from the league to the clubs, and from the clubs to the players. And then there is no close of the loop, so there is no reconnection to actually the people who are the reason because of which we're in all of this, in sports, in this case in football. So there is no consistent contribution to society. There's actually an interesting example. There was a lot of talk, or is a lot of talk, about FIFA, and rightly so, during the week. If we look at the so-called corporate social responsibility scheme of FIFA, it's quite interesting to look at, and I would highlight here that both in the social part of it, as also in the sustainability part of it, it's very interesting to look at and actually learn from it to a certain extent. And here now, it's relatively easy to blame and to point at the problem, but I would like to highlight also the opportunities we are missing on our end. When I say here old power versus new power, I think we do have the opportunity to achieve system change, but I think we're also in, let's say, our educated to protect, let's say, the organizations we work with. And this means that we are doing our own fundraising, and by nature we're competing with others too, who are trying to do the same fundraising, so we try to obviously be successful and drive our organizations, and we don't leverage the potential of actually collective action. In terms of success versus values, I think as long as we understand success as related to profit maximization or to accumulation of wealth, and we don't understand success as contribution, as engagement, as let's say rather giving than taking, I think we are actually part of the whole thing. So for example, if we, let's say, I don't know, your favorite football club, but if in Germany there was a situation last week, there was a hand goal, or you can probably remember France-Ireland, there was this goal made with the hand of Thierry Henry. We actually don't take action on that. I mean, we as a French, or we as a, in that case it was a Hanover, the Hanover football club in Germany, we just continue celebrating the success of our team. Why don't we take action against that? Why don't we stand up and say that's wrong? So I think we just have to accept that to a certain extent we are part of this broken system. And the team play towards a common goal, as I said, I think it's very hard, because we're all educated like this, to leave our egos, brands, and our drive to create wealth as an organization or as an individual behind us, and actually focus on what's relevant, focus on what we want to achieve together, focus on the solution we want to deliver, and use our brands and our knowledge and our individual strength to contribute to the collective solution. I think that's something where I would say I would go as far as saying collaboration is probably the biggest innovation ahead of us. And mentioned initially the historic chance for football to to use this opportunity now, that it is questioned, that there's nothing anymore given for granted, and it's now the opportunity as football, if you translate just the metaphor of team play, and you would apply it to football, that everybody has a role to play in order to score the goal at the end. That would be the opportunity to be a role model for other industries or other sports. So where are we in this? I mentioned that we are this global network of quality partners. This is organizations in the community, sustained by the community, that are delivering quality in work. We have developed, and that's quite interesting to look at. 3 months ago, so we opened an innovation platform, which is Unleash Football, whereby we invited everybody to share their ideas of how they believe football can be a greater force for good. And it's interesting to see how people who are not involved, let's say, in the everyday conversation about like the one we are having here, they come up with quite interesting ideas completely out of the box, which is something I would like to relate to that was mentioned yesterday night in the theater. That how would the picture look like if we took a blank sheet of paper and invented sports today, or invented football, or the football and the sports governing bodies today? Would it be, let's say, my program as a FIFA presidential candidate, or would it be quite far away from that? Because we're taking so many things as granted, and we're not having the courage to actually think out of the box and reinvent where things have to be reinvented, because we have a purpose and we have a vision with what we do, and we just don't do or tweak and twist here and there because it always has been, and we believe it can't be changed. And then another thing we are currently founding is a 1% common goal fund. We believe that football has to share at least 1% of its revenues to be invested strategically in where football makes a difference to people's lives. And we believe that translates then at least in the support of 5 million marginalized youth, young talents, if you want, not football talents, but just young people, talented, that will be starting to contribute to society and will be part of it, and everybody wins. But as I said at the beginning, we are part of the solution. It's not just that the system has to change or the institutions have to change. We are part of the change. We just have to want it enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Jürgen, for perhaps some radical ideas, some paradigmatic shifts, and instead of reform, perhaps one of the few speakers we've had that's talked about real revolution. And after listening to the presidential candidates last night that said change was impossible, it's refreshing to see that someone thinks that change actually might be possible, and this could be a possible way forward for that. So to return to the Agenda 2020 proper, the subject of the panel in general, and this of course will tie into the larger themes of revolution or reform, we turn to Andreas Selliaas from Norway, who will talk about the dubious promises of Agenda 2020.
Thank you. I'm using this. It's okay. Okay. Thanks. I'm coming from Norway and an Olympic bid process that failed. Oslo did not apply for the Winter Olympics in 2022, and that's why Beijing got the games. During the debate in Norway, the sports federations promised that the Agenda 2020 would change the IOC completely. My task this evening is to highlight some of the outcomes of the Agenda 2020 so far, and then we can start a discussion after that. Sorry. Before I go into the big document called Agenda 2020, I want to discuss these 3 pairs of definitions. Because in Norway, when the people wanting the Olympics tried to calm down those who were negative, they said, when the people against said that we need a reform before we can apply for Olympics, they really meant revolution. They want everybody in the IOC to get away, new members, younger members, not from Middle East and things like that. So when we talk about the Agenda 2020, we're talking about a kind of reform. Second, is the Agenda 2020 a result of a reactive process or a proactive process? Did they react to scandals and things like that? Or was this an agenda by wise people trying to prevent scandals from happening in the future? I think it's the first. Every change in the IOC has come after a scandal or corruption or something like that. The new sponsor system came on the table after the before the Los Angeles Olympics because IOC was bankrupt. The new corruption laws, if you can call it, corruption, the fight against the not fight against the corruption, but came after the Salt Lake City scandal. So this is a document that is a kind of reactive. It comes from that it's not a revolution. Third, when we listen to IOC members and things like that, agenda is wonderful. Agenda 2020 is good. They always refer to the document, not what has been done in action or what has been. They're talking about the output of this, what they want to achieve. But how we should evaluate Agenda 20 is look at the outcomes, and we have some outcomes from the Agenda 2020 already, and I think the outcomes is not quite what they told us when they adopted this. First, the output. It's 40 changes to the Olympic chapter, or the Olympic chapter. I will not go through all of 40 points, but I will highlight some what I think is the most important things in this document. Of course, transparency, democracy, and things like that is, of course, the most important thing if you listen to the IOC. But this is what they say in the agenda. In the agenda, they have changed the bidding process. No, cities are not applying for becoming a bid city. They are invited. That's a new process, and I will argue that this is a more close process and less transparent process than was before. They also want to allow more flexibility when putting together programs. No, they are not mentioning, no, they call the competitions events. They have this the ceiling on how many events they can have, but you can, if Tokyo gets they have the Olympics now, they can put into some of the local sports so it will be more popular in Japan. That's that's flexibility, and by that, you are starting a kind of fight between sports. Which sport or event should go out and which would go in. I will talk more about that. But they allow more flexibility, also when it comes to where to stage the events, inside or outside the city chosen. The Olympic Channel is very interesting. The Olympic Channel is a new invention. They want not only to profile themselves every second year or every fourth year during the Olympics. The IOC wants an Olympic Channel so you can sit and in front of the television or tablet or whatever to watch to watch Olympic events taking place in history, to profile their sponsors, but also to make people to think of the Olympics also between the Olympic Games. And of course, I will discuss a little bit about the youth perspective here, because the youth, attracting youth is very important for the IOC. Every 4 years, the average age of the TV viewer increases with 4 years. So in 20 years, everybody will be 100 years watching television on the Olympic Games. That's their fare. That's what they fare. So youth is very important to attract TV viewers, and that also means that they have to try to adjust the program so youth wants to do sports and also want to watch. So that was the output. So what is the outcome so far? First, the adoption of the agenda was a little bit strange. Of course, you had these, how many, 40,000 suggestions of what should be in the agenda. And then IOC put up 14 committees or something like that. And the committees discussed what should be in the agenda. But at the Congress in Monaco, there were no discussion. All suggestions were adopted unanimously. No, almost no debate. It was, of course, debate when they discussed the age limit. I think that was the biggest debate during the Congress. So for democracy, transparency, it started not that good, in my opinion, because it was not a debate. The time limit for adopting this was very, very strict. So it was not much room for debate, but also I think that the people there were not very interested to debate it. Second, it's what I call the Salt Lake City syndrome, because one of the things they did not introduce in the new agenda was to reintroduce that the IOC members could go to the bid cities and see for themselves. And that had that affected the election of the Olympics 2022, because if you should follow the charter that the legacy should be there, the arenas should be there in place long before the Olympics and things like that, then it's good for the IOC people to go and see the venues. Beijing won with only 4 votes. And if you see technically on the bids, Kazakhstan was much closer, or Almaty was much closer to the Agenda 2020 than the Beijing. They have almost all venues there already. They have snow. That's good when it's Winter Olympics. And they were more developed when it came to arenas and things like that. So if they follow their agenda, they should allow the IOC members to visit Almaty, because half of them did not know anything about the place beforehand. The second is the Salt Lake City syndrome, is that when you could not, IOC members could not go to the cities went to the IOC members. And that created a huge industry of lobbyists traveling after the IOC members. And when they also introduce flexibility into the application process, then more lobbyists will travel after the IOC members to tell them that you should vote for our sport, or this is an invitation process, you should invite us, and things like that. And that can be a little bit confusing. Then, They have abolished now, when it's invitations, when it's bid by invitation, they travel around. It's a secret process. The city that want to bid or is in the process don't have to tell their population, the government, anything, that they are in the process. It's very secretive. So it's less transparent. Before, everybody said, we wanted to bid for the Olympics, and everybody in the country were proud that maybe we will have the Olympics. It's not that any longer. So during the press conference, they said we have 5 candidates for the 2024. And one journalist asked, was it other bid cities in this process? And they refused to answer. And they were pressured, and they said, yes, we negotiated with Baku. So if we had the old system, everybody would know that Baku was in the bid process, but not now. So it's much more secretive. Also, they have changed the evaluation process after you have a bid. No, they don't have ranking. 1 point for security, 2 points for environment. No, they have different phases because they want all 5 cities to be in the process until the last date. And when you don't have rankings, the people at home doesn't know how much effort is put into this, how money we need to use on this. It's much more secretive. It's not transparent at all. Also, you have this evaluation committee who gives their recommendations to the IOC executive committee or a bid committee. And so then you can ask, is the personal connection is much more important now because it's less transparent. When we don't see the technical evaluation, the Norwegian IOC member said that we don't vote with our heads, we vote with our gut feeling or heart. So, but no, when you don't see the marks on security and environment and venues and things like that, then I think it's more gut feeling into this process now than it was before. The broadcasting I will not touch upon. A little bit of Youth Olympics, because Norway will arrange Youth Olympics in February. We have Olympics, a small Olympics. So on the left-hand side, it's the promises or the goals of staging these Youth Olympics. Bring together the world's best athletes, doubtful. It's a competition with 14 and 16-year-olds. How can you know that you have the world's best athletes there? Education in Olympism, hard to measure. Sport is better than war. That is Olympism in short. Hard to measure if they will contribute to a peaceful world after. Share and celebrate cultures of the world. It's fun. Reach youth throughout the world. No research shows that you can reach throughout the world by staging Youth Olympics. Raise awareness among young people is the same. Tackling consequences of an inactive lifestyle. No effect. London Olympics show that had at least a very little effect. And also when you have a Youth Olympics that is not the broadcasting companies don't want to show on television, and the youth probably won't see, it's hard to say how they can reach out, and so on and so forth. So, the Youth Olympics, if that is the new thing, the only thing I've seen in the Olympic agenda now is that they have moved the 2022 Olympics to 2023. That's the new thing with the Youth Olympics. So, the Youth Olympics is in fact a kind of old-fashioned thing. It's an old idea, sport and war, anachronism maybe, I'm not sure. Old school. When you go to the Youth Olympics, you have to stay there for 3 weeks. You cannot go outside. You have to stay there because you are going to be educated in Olympism, meet all the people. You can imagine 14-year-old have to stay at the dormitory for 14 days without having the opportunity to go home. Ooh. It's all sports. It's the same sports, almost. They have changed a little bit. So, and that, will that attract young people? I'm not sure. Okay, so the conclusion here. The Agenda 2020 has made Thomas Bach, the IOC president, and the executive board more powerful. They have more power now than they had before because they sit on every information on what is going on. It's less transparent. The processes are less transparent. Of course, if Thomas Bach says, my salary is this and that, and we have meetings there and that, you can see our calendar, it's more transparent. But the processes seems less transparent than before. Yeah, I think I ended there. I had some other points about the Olympic channel, but we can take that in the discussion, because the revenues from the Olympic channel, in Norway or Europe, they sold it to the American company. The American company, all the commercials there will go. They have this the revenues from these sales and the sponsors and the commercials. They will go out of Europe, and maybe that will decrease the revenues for local media and local organizations. Yeah, we can take that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. I'd like to invite the members of the table, as well as our esteemed guest, to come take questions. And I will take the chair's prerogative here and make a couple observations that will send out a question to the panel, and then I'll come around for questions immediately afterwards. And as you're getting mic'd up, if you could maybe do two things at once, I'll make my observations and questions while you're getting hooked up. It seems that a few things are clear that have come out in the last few days of discussion, and one of them is that the Olympics and the World Cup are business models, and that these are highly lucrative businesses that operate under conditions of exception, and that have various consequences depending on where their events are realized. And one of the things that struck me from the earlier session on Agenda 2020 is the ways in which we tend to disassociate sport, the economics of sport, and the impacts of sport from larger global processes. And my question to the table in general, and all of our commentators, is that in your presentations and in your capacities, how do you envision that something like Agenda 2020 actually serves, or let me rephrase this, does it serve to only change the way this business is done so that it can respond to crises and maintain its position of relative privilege and isolation from not only the world in general, but from particular concerns? Or are there other ways that can radically alter the way that the IOC and FIFA do business on a global scale? And do, say, agendas that are being put forward by the IOC itself, can they be sufficient to reform the business practices of the IOC, similarly to the way that we have suggested that FIFA is incapable of reforming itself? And can the suggestions of the shoulds and should nots of the UN have any real impact upon the ways in which mega events extremely negatively affect the locations in which they're held? And we can go in the order of the presenters, so we can start here with Chadia.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, is it okay? You hear me? Well, at least from a UNODC perspective, well, I'll mainly talk from a legislative point of view here, is that, well, no, we have more and more states that are part of this convention, And as I was saying earlier, it's like we have many provisions who really encourage a fight against corruption and or match fixing, if we're discussing this, especially when it comes to sanctioning legal persons, for example, or the involvement of a private sector in involvement and sanctioning the private sector. It's like, I mean, we do encourage states, of course, to have relevant provisions, but we also follow up on this, on the recommendation that we are doing in these states. So I think from a legislative point of view, more and more states are compliant with the Convention Against Corruption, and then more compliant to like general sporting rules. But when it comes to implementation, of course, there's still some work to do. But I'm confident that in the long run, countries or states might be obliged to really implement the legislation that they have in place. So I think that well, time will tell. But yeah.
Thank you, Naomi.
Well, the recommendations that we are making, the Sport and Rights Alliance is making, would significantly change the way these events are organised, or certainly, add something very, very important in terms of protections for human rights linked to the event. So I think we should give this a try, and the IC really has an opportunity now with the host city contract for 2024 to make this difference. So really, we're just waiting to see if they will. They've talked the talk. We're waiting to see if they'll kind of raise their game and walk the walk on this, and then perhaps if this fails, we will come back to looking at whether this can be done from the inside.
Yeah, probably just to add to the two of you, I think it's worth rethinking, or at least making the exercise of what is sports for, and what is football in our specific case for. And I think we would relatively quickly come to the point that it is for the people, right? So if we would understand the people or society as our shareholders, we would be measured against with everything we do, different to, let's say, being federations or clubs, or the players are our share, or the stakeholders. I think decisions would be taken in a different way, but this needs a complete paradigm shift of why does sport institution or football institution exist in the first place.
When it comes to the Agenda 2020, I agree with Andrew Symbalist, who was in the previous discussion, that the Agenda 2020 is a compilation of rules that are already in place, most of them. It's a kind of structuring what's already going on. And in addition, it's a new business model. What is of IOC's concern is increasing revenues, of course. And everything they do now when it comes to the Olympic Channel is trying to make this into a business that can give them more money, I guess, in 10, 15 years. They want to decrease the costs of the Olympics, increase the revenues, and take revenues locally through the IOC system and give them back. So I think this is a kind of new business model, and they've lost control previously. The costs increased. Now this is a kind of damage control. It's a way to rescue their reputation, and of course cost control. But this, in the end, is about increasing their revenue. It's my opinion.
Okay, strong provocation.
Firstly, I think that in order to see the effect of Agenda 2020 and it really delivering many of the action points, it needs another year for those to be actually worked on. I think Andreas is keener on getting headlines than reality. in regard to the Olympic Channel, it's got absolutely nothing to do with showing continual repeats of Olympic broadcasting. And we've already begun, they've already begun, the Olympic Channel management, the workshops with the international federations in order to discuss with them what footage is going to be available to use as part of the channel. It's going to be very much driven by digital content, and they will use footage that they can obtain from the federations. Their goal is to work with the Olympic movement, with the different stakeholders, in order to promote those sports. So where we struggle within skiing, for example, to get coverage for freestyle events, for snowboarding events, and then also for the non-Olympic disciplines. There we have a really good platform to be able to promote those, and we will also be meeting together with them and the rights holders to find some opportunities here. So these are concrete steps that are happening. This is absolutely nothing about just showing old replays of Lillehammer 1994, which is probably what most Norwegians would anyway like to see, actually, but not the rest of the world anymore. And it's certainly not about a business model for the IOC at this stage. It's actually a pretty big investment for sports that struggles to get footage and get good broadcast time on not only on television but also even with digital coverage, because of the massive coverage of football.
Just before we get to the questions, would you suggest then that Agenda 2020 is not a reactionary program of the IOC to restructure their business model in the face of a crisis of legitimacy?
There are certainly some elements of it that have been a consequence of issues from the past, but I'm not going to spend the whole session now, the panel, unless you would like that, to focus on the different, I would say, certain misinformations from Andreas's presentation, or the desire just to be provocative, because frankly there's no intention of Youth Olympic Games lasting for 3 weeks. There are also other factual issues in regard to the role of the Evaluation Commission and so on, but those are other issues. Let's say, reaction from Salt Lake City 2002 took place a long time ago, and there have been a number of steps that took place since then in regard to the membership of the IOC, with having places then fixed for National Olympic Committee representation and international federations, the Athletes Commission with vote, with seat on the executive board, and various different measures like that. So this was a reactionary step from back then. The process that's been done now, it was kind of what I was alluding to earlier in regard to lots of different patches in the software, that it was not now time to roll out Windows 10 basically. Other software is available, and that's really what they've taken the opportunity to do, to scale back, to look at all of the issues on the table and to try to address many different things at the same time, rather than a bit piecemeal. This one and it moved on, that one didn't. So now time to try to synchronize.
Okay, thank you.
Just quickly to add to that, for me it's very hard to judge on reform measures if there's not a clear vision in place, because then I don't know why and what should I reform actually for. So what for me is missing is a real vision for sport and a real vision for football as a phenomenon, as what should football be for, and then the institutions are just following that function and create the right form for it. And the second one, I think, as a sports person or as a follower or a believer, a lover in my case, football, we should make it much harder to gain our loyalty for the institutions. I mean, we are very loyal in regards to our sport, but I think we should make it much harder for the institution to gain our loyalty and to be actually true to their purpose.
Thank you. We have first question from the floor over here on the left. Then we go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is Nikolaos Theodorou from Greece, Athens. I have two questions. One is for Jürgen. And Greece is facing a non-stop massive 500,000 people invasion from Anatolia this summer. The first hotspots and camps are now a reality in Lesbos Island, Kos and Athens. Do you see street football world as a relief to the young, small refugees and immigrants' misery?
Do you want to go with the second question?
Yeah. The second question is for Naomi. Naomi, there is an amount of football players that are victims of the match-fixing system and they are going to jail. They are the last weak link of a corrupted long chain of the real lords of the rings. Under this point of view, do you see that your NGO has a role to play? Do they deserve amnesty? And if yes, what are you going to do about these victims of the match-fixing mafia at the international federations?
You want to start?
Yeah, I can do. I don't know about those cases to be able to tell you whether they're cases that Amnesty would work on when we take on cases of individuals who are suffering human rights abuses or who are at risk. There's a whole team that deals with that, and a lot of research goes into whether they're cases that we can work on. I mean, we can talk afterwards if you want. You can give me some information, and I can take that back to Amnesty. I'm afraid that's the best answer I can give you on that at the moment.
Yeah, and from my side, yes. My experience tells me that wherever there's a social issue and there's an appetite to engage with the sport, in this case football, it adds value to the impact. There are some of our network members already working in Syria, working on the Jordanian border with Syria and working in Iraq. And all across Europe, and not just now starting with the so-called crisis, but they're doing this for many years already, because I mean now it's many people at a time, but migration has been and will be an issue for a while.
I raised especially this question to you because in Greece, the Greek Football Federation, as a branch of UEFA and FIFA, they are doing fucking nothing.
Yeah, we're back to the purpose question.
Thank you. Second question back here. And then third one's there, fourth, fifth.
Thank you. My name is Dennis from the University of Hamburg. I'm very sorry to bring this up again because I did it the first day, but I would very much like the table to comment on the fact that Mr. Bach repeatedly, and he did this yesterday in front of the United Nations in New York, said that Rio de Janeiro will be a better and more equal city after the Olympics. And how does this go together with the Agenda 2020 reform process and the human rights violations, the massive human rights violations we have seen in Rio and that they are still going on? Thank you.
Anyone from the table can take this.
You should answer this. You have lived in Rio for 10 years.
That's true, but I think Dennis might know my answer already. Anyone?
As I said in my presentation, we've got really serious concerns about Rio. The forced evictions that have been happening over the last few years to make way for infrastructure for the event, and then police violence. And actually, a lady over there I was talking to over dinner about police killings in Brazil in the run-up to the World Cup. I think there were some new figures out yesterday. Amnesty's work around the Olympics next year is going to be focused on police violence and the killing of, in the last 5 years, 1,500, as I said, civilians have been killed, most of them young black men. So if the figures that came out yesterday about these killings ahead of the World Cup are anything to go by, we've got our work cut out.
Yeah, I would probably approach it from a different perspective. I still have a hard time to get my head around why would a city in this case not want to leverage a mega event like the Olympic Games as a benefit for their citizens. So that's sort of, I mean, if I'm bidding for an Olympic Games or a FIFA World Cup, why wouldn't I want to make the most out of that for the people who live in my city? And you know what I'm saying? I'm saying it's the mega event won't change a city if it just comes and goes, right? Any mega event. But what I would envision is a decision maker on both ends, the ones who are standing for, let's say, the Olympic Games in that case, and the local authorities, to actually take this, because it's a huge opportunity if you had the opportunity to actually embed it in the development process of a city or a country. But I mean, that should be the reason why I do a mega event. If not, it's just, I mean, individual or group benefits, but not for the people.
Jürgen, maybe you have not met Brazilian politicians.
Yeah, I have.
But I don't know that they are embedded in a system of patronage and
sure.
clientelism that uses the events for their own private gain.
Completely. And that has to be changed. Yeah, and that's not naive. I mean, you could say it's naive. But as long as we believe this is not possible, we will have this conversation in 10 years again and in 20 years. So what's the...
Which is why when, you know, in the whole process of hosting an event, there has to be a very strong and robust system for monitoring any promises that are made, because you can say anything, you can write anything down, but if then that's not followed up and there's nobody keeping an eye on whether a host city or country is complying with the promises it's made, then nothing's going to change.
Mm.
Yeah, I pass.
Okay, any other comments on this one? Okay, we'll go back here. Thank you.
Naomi, you just provided. That was one of the answers I was.
Sorry, could you identify yourself first, please?
My name is Bruce Kidd. I'm a veteran of. How about that? Well, I can just talk like this.
No,
My name is Bruce Kidd. These are familiar old debates, although in new circumstances and in new ways, and I've been a veteran of them. I'm a member of the Canadian Olympic Association. I'm a member of Amnesty International in Canada. And I felt that Olympic 2020 was hopeful. Not perfect, but hopeful. Many of us have long been calling for an Olympic channel so that the Olympic movement could assert its message and showcase its sport against the capitalist monoculture that we see all the time, except for the time of major games, and provide a much broader spectrum of what actually exists in sport, and certainly to provide to show the way that women excel in sport, which at least in North America, except for the time of the Olympic Games, is virtually invisible. Secondly, I was very encouraged by the new bidding rules, because it gives cities an opportunity to show a development approach to the presentation of games. And from that point of view, from an urban planning point of view, to break up the old expectation that cities must abide by what the IOC and the IFs want, even if that distorts the development of their cities and the development of sport in their countries. I was very encouraged by the requirement in the new bidding contract around human rights during the games. It doesn't go anywhere near far enough, but it's at least an exception by the IOC that this has got to be part of the staging of major games. So I was very encouraged by that. To be sure, I'm worried about co-optation. Andreas, I was chilled by your presentation on what could be the downside of each of these open-ended reforms, what I would call unintended consequences, but you presented as scenarios of I was going to say evil, but maybe that's a little harsh. So I see this as open-ended and hopeful if the right decisions are made and the right changes are made. So how do we hold their feet to the fire? How do we insist that these reforms are interpreted in a progressive way and that in fact we create an insistent movement that not only monitors them, but monitors them according to a whole series of demands about what these reforms could do. And what I worry about is that there's not a progressive constituency for these reforms within the world of sport, let alone the world itself. But you've thought about this too, and I'd be very interested in what you have to say.
Thank you.
Is that to me or you?
Up to you.
Yeah, you can start.
I share absolutely the perspective that you have on all of the specific points that you brought up, and think that yes, it's important that it's not just all about the document that was presented last December, and now the reality and what will really give credibility to the reforms and to Olympic Agenda 2020 is how they actually pan out. Now, they've already implemented the commissions that will be responsible for the different areas, with new persons involved and with a wider involvement from different stakeholders who are part of the movement, as opposed to really just having the same group of people who've always been part of them within the past. Frankly, the impression that we have from within other stakeholders, not directly the IOC, is that actually there's a very strong internal pressure to be following up within all of the different points. Of course, it's a slightly different timescale to certain things. Some of the points are very much specific in terms of the games, and then you have the bidding process for 2024, you have the invitation phase, and now then the three-step process that they're going to have up until the election. But then you've got other things that have a different timescale concerning the whole projects relating to the environment, to sustainability, and so on. And tangible outcomes is definitely on the agenda for the international federations, and I believe also the National Olympic Committees are deliberating that as part of their General Assembly this week in Washington. So I'm aligned with your perspective. Is there another authority that can be watching over them? I think that there's a strong self-policing going on because the IOC President, Executive Board are really determined to make their mark within the movement in terms of what they're actually committed to with the 20 plus 20 points.
Andreas?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. What I wish is that the bidding processes and the processes for including new sports, excluding sports, that the processes are transparent, that we see what's going on. That, I think that's the most important thing. I think that's I don't and the openness can make us control that or make us see that they are doing what you say you are doing, or that the IOC are doing with self-control and things like that. Because what should not happen is that we get the feeling that the IOC have secret negotiations with political leaders all over the world. So we don't know what's going on. It's in fact the countries or the cities who are going to pay for this. In the end, the population should know what the politicians are doing. So it should be transparent. It should be open, so we can see what's going on, and then the outside world can help IOC to go the right direction. It should be a kind of, not necessarily a cooperation, but an understanding that we want to go the same way. Because I'm not against Olympics. I'm not against the IOC if they do the right thing.
I think that, if I could just add one comment here before we get to your question, that there are two documents that are intimately linked, and one is Agenda 2020, and the other is the new host city contract that has been put out. And in Agenda 2020, the word urban and urban planning, they do not appear, as if these events happen somewhere else. And then in the host city contract, the same conditions that create the monopoly rents that the IOC extract are still very much embedded in that contract. And so cities are 100% liable for any cost overruns, for acts of God, etc. And so these two documents have to be looked at in conjunction, and you have to look at the rhetoric of Agenda 2020, which is okay, very nice and sounds very good, but the instrumentality of the host city contract is what really is where the pudding is being eaten, as it were, and eaten in multiple countries at multiple times in different ways. Do you have to follow?
Just very briefly, I know that FIFA has preoccupied Play the Game 2015, but it would be good if we had another forum of such a diversity as this one that would prepare something like a consensus statement along the Cologne consensus statement to keep the pressure up in terms of how the progressive community that worries about these policy issues would like to see this interpreted and implemented.
Agreed. Here.
Hi, my name is Andrea. I'm from Terre des Hommes, also a part of the Sport and Rights Alliance with Naomi. I just have a question to Sarah. I think, and following up on what you just mentioned, the whole city contract is very important. And I think for NGOs in general, the main expectation was that human rights were going to be included. And this was the first step, a first big outcome after the Agenda 2020. So my question is just, why wasn't it included?
You mean it wasn't included before, or the fact that it's included now, but from your perspective to...
the wording is not included in the host city contract, human rights.
If you do a Control F search through all the documents for human rights, it doesn't, you get nothing, 0 results.
I can't speak to the specific, I'm afraid, and haven't been involved with the editing or preparing or anything like that. But I thought it was mentioned that it is stated, but it doesn't go far enough from your perspective.
No. We were expecting that this would be the first big step to change, because as mentioned by Christopher as well, this is a really important document which flows the other responsibilities. So if it's not mentioned there, this, where would it be then, or how do you think this would be addressed? My first question is why, but then if this is not, if you want to address then how?
Yeah, I mean, clearly that it's very much a question that has to be addressed to the leadership of the IOC in terms of how they actually perceive and intend to address it, whether it's part of the host city contract, whether it's part of the deliberations that take place on a very regular basis with the organising committee, of which the government, the city and so on are part of it. I've been at a number of the IOC coordination commission meetings for Winter Games, where you have the dialogue between the IOC representatives, both from the staff and from the membership and so on, as well as the organising committee, the city, the national associations, where they're really deliberating all aspects of the organisation of the games. So that's, as it were, the implementation of the host city contract. Now, specifically addressing the situation with the workers and conditions and all of these elements, yes, they are part of the discussions when they're talking about workforce and they're talking about volunteers and so on. So from a practical perspective, that's the experiences that I've had, and that's with Pyeongchang now, and previously we attended as Winter Federations, all of us, one of the Sochi commissions, but Pyeongchang now, Korea, I've been 3 times. And yes, that's the level at which the discussions are taking place in order to ensure that there really is a clear commitment from the city and from the organising committee. But in terms of addressing it and translating it into the written agreement, I wouldn't have an explanation, I'm sorry.
We have one more question. Yes, right there.
Hi, my name is Louis. I'm from the German Sports University. Andreas, in your presentation, you talk about some of the goals for the Youth Olympics, and you mentioned things like education and mass participation, bringing people together, creating peace. So I guess my question for the table is, aren't we expecting too much from these events? Shouldn't we just be satisfied when these events go well and just don't screw everything up? Isn't it too much to ask? Education and mass participation and this and that, it sounds like a lot. And for people who work in events, I think they're generally happy when they have a 3-week period where all the athletes are there, everyone is fine, and they're all able to leave comfortably.
Yeah. First, only by establishing Youth Olympics, for me, it's a kind of statement that it's something wrong with the original Olympics. So I think that is a clear indicator that something was wrong. At the same time, the Youth Olympics is very similar to the Olympics that Pierre de Coubertin created. It was youth who should compete so they could secure peace in the future. So yes, I think they do too much out of a sports competition in the Youth Olympics. And in Norway, the debate on the Youth Olympics is very special because you invite people, athletes, 14, 15, 16 years old. And in Norway, we say that you should take your time before you start a career as a professional athlete. Take your time, develop. It's not the results that is important when you are 12, 13, 14 years old. It's later when you are growing older. So I think we demand too much of them for 2 reasons. First, we demand that 14-year-olds should compete and be at international competitions already when they are young. And the second, when they are invited, we force them to be a part of this education program and things like that. I think the intentions are good, but I don't think maybe the result is that good. I don't know. Of course, they will not come home and they will come home and say we had a great time, of course. But maybe we put too much into it. It's also a question of money. It costs money to have all these people here and start these education programs and things like that. But that is another discussion.
So I'm happy to be able to make sure that Andreas is going to sleep better tonight, because he's going to know that for at least 60% of the competitions there are no 14-year-olds participating.
Okay.
So at least within the FIS disciplines, the athletes are a minimum of 16 years old. They're 16 to 18.
But that was a debate
they are,
before Lillehammer got
possibly,
Olympics.
but let's be factual when it comes to the reality. And education, of course, it's not about sitting in a classroom, and there's certainly none of that planned. The program is actually called Learn and Share, and there's a whole bunch of stuff which is going to be implemented to basically give the kids and the youngsters who are there a chance to get together, to learn and share with each other, to have the opportunity to try out different events, to find out more about their sport, to have sessions with athlete role models, be able to ask them questions, to visit ski factory, to really interact and learn how to potentially have other pathways for a career in sport, and these sort of things that may be also not only interesting but fun. I would say there was a point, there were a few points actually under the Youth Olympics which I think also misinformation. One is in terms of the events on the program. The events on the program are pretty different to the main games. There are lots of events that are taking place which are designed and specifically for the youth, the cross-country cross, Nordic team event, Alpine team event, mixed NOC events. There's a bunch of stuff that's much more adapted for youngsters, and it's not just the traditional program. Just a short information, the brainchild behind the Youth Olympic Games was the former IOC president, Jacques Rogge, who brought it into the European system when he was president of the European Olympic Committee as this European Youth Olympic Festival. And it was a festival, and it was really a chance to try to engage with youngsters so that they were getting excited about sport. And it's not connected to mass participation and to try to get all kids in the world, but it was really to say, yes, we're recognizing the youth, recognizing that it would be nice that there's a platform for you to inspire you about the values of Olympism and what that can mean for sport. And of course, when he was IOC president, he then wanted to bring that in as part of the Games. So it's been also a chance to experiment with sport and to try out different things, and that's really what it served as a platform for the Games.
Okay, thank you. You have a
just
comment?
quickly, I wouldn't like to insulate the mega events from what the sport or football is about, but it happens like that. So it seems to be a planet in itself, the mega event, and I think it's just due to the lack of vision of why the thing exists, right? I mean, if we knew what we wanted to achieve with sports in general, we would then decide, okay, this is the institution we need for that. This is sort of the event series we need to achieve that. But this happens all isolatedly. I mean, there's the event, and there's another event, and there's a third event, and then we have to care. We have to look after the players or the sports people. Or I mean, there's so many different sort of parallel streams going on that at the end of the day, you don't know why certain events exist. Just for the event's sake, just for the profit's sake, but they don't have any reason for being.
So you asked why if we should just leave them to it. When
No. So I asked if we should just be content with them not screwing things up and that all these extra things are too much.
Okay, but when you when these big sports events do either exacerbate or cause human rights abuses, it's not an option to just leave them to it or accept the way things are. So really, I think we shouldn't be happy until these events don't do that, and we really need to see proper due diligence done and processes to monitor any commitments made to human rights.
Sorry, James, we are 15 hours into the day already, so I think with permission of the panel, I'd like to offer a round of applause for our panelists. And thank you all for your attention and questions, and we'll see you at 7 o'clock on the running course, no doubt.